Should you buy a PlayStation Vita in 2019? So, the last time Elliot and I got together and do a buying guide, that was, well, A, before we got engaged, but B, that was the PSP guide, which has recently really been taking off. Thanks for the support.
Yes, which has led to about 1 million comments of, you guys should do a video about the Vita. One small problem with that, we didn't have a Vita.
Yeah,
until now.
Technically I did the PlayStation TV buying guide last year, but it's amazing what changes in a year, so I think I need to update some of that, which is fine. We can do that today. But also, I've wanted to do a buying guide on every single PlayStation console out there. I've done the PS1, the PS2, all of them, except the Vita. And I felt like I technically got away with that with the PS TV guide, but...
Not really.
Yeah, and I had so many quests to do this. So finally, after we got engaged, you went at Retropalooza Houston, surprised me by getting me a Vita.
It was the fastest I have ever dropped $100 on anything without questioning it at all.
And it's so funny because, you know, the Vita, it did not sell well. In fact, I think we can say it bombed.
A lot of it was, truthfully, the memory cards.
True, and we'll get to that.
Yes.
But the funny thing is, as badly as the Vita sold, it kind of had this interesting niche of like indies and RPGs that we've now seen mostly move to Nintendo Switch.
Which is incredible. Nothing beats the Vita.
Yeah, this thing was really the place for visual novels, JRPGs, niche JRPGs, and even a lot of indie releases for years.
Yes.
In fact, even though it was formally discontinued earlier this year in March 2019, there are still new independent releases. I think even some like limited run games and whatnot that are coming out for the Vita. So today on Stuff We Play, we're going to decide if the PlayStation Vita is right
for you.
We nearly cut each other off.
I knew what the line was and I was really excited.
Do you want to redo that?
No, leave it in. That's cool. That's Gucci. In 2009, rumors began circulating about Sony working on a successor to the PSP. Sony's first handheld had been quite successful, and though it had failed to beat Nintendo's DS handheld in terms of sales, over 80 million units had been sold worldwide. This new PSP was expected to be faster, sleeker, and have capabilities above that of the PlayStation 2, but below those of the PlayStation 3. Rumors continued to circulate throughout 2009 and 2010 until finally, in January 2011, at the PlayStation Meeting press conference, the PlayStation Vita was unveiled to the world, named after the Latin word for life.
This new portable PlayStation console would feature an OLED screen, the ability to display HD graphics, dual joysticks, cameras, touchpads, the ability to connect to a 3G wireless network along with Wi-Fi, and, instead of the PSP's iconic UMD discs, games that came on SD card-sized cartridges. With a price of $250 American, the same as Nintendo's much less powerful 3DS handheld, which was out that same year, it seemed that the PS Vita was destined for greatness.
But not all was well at the Vita's launch.
So, I remember debating heavily between the 3DS and the Vita before they came out. In the months before the release, I remember going to GameStop, trading in a bunch of games, including my shiny blue DSi, and I was honestly leaning more towards the Vita initially. But then I found out that $250 price point came with some caveats. Keep in mind, I was 12 years old at this point. We're talking not only game trades, but like Christmas money, birthday money. I know, right? The thing is that $250 was just the price for a Wi-Fi only version of the system. For the 3G version, that cost $300, plus an additional $15 a month for 3G service. And that was only available from one American carrier, AT&T. And trust me, though Verizon is debatably the worst American cellular carrier due to being partially responsible for the hellspawn known as a Jeep Pie, my parents were a Sprint at the time and had no desire to get a contract with a different carrier just so I could play Marvel vs. Capcom portably online.
That's such a mood.
It's a definite mood. To be fair, the real reason I wanted it was that portable version of Marvel vs. Capcom, and I think Street Fighter X Tech, and it's funny because I am trash at fighting games, but those are what kind of sold me initially.
But anyway, There was also the issue of the memory cards. The PSP used Sony's proprietary memory sticks for storage until third parties started making memory stick shells that could take 2 whole micro SD cards, making PSP storage vastly cheaper and easier to expand. To combat that, Sony made the Vita's proprietary memory cards super small and very expensive. Compared to the 3DS, which took basic SD cards, this was a bad move.
Also, while the 3DS kept the same charger as the Nintendo DSi, which I guess was technically proprietary, the original Vita also had a proprietary charger, different from any other PlayStation console or indeed any Vita revisions that followed. Also, the games, though more impressive, were more expensive than the 3DS games. So ultimately, I did go with the 3DS. At launch. I know, I have one of those special ambassador 3DSs. Within a few months of launch, Nintendo realized that they really shouldn't have the 3DS at $250 and dropped the price by $70 to $180. I said dollars a lot in that sentence. By that point, it was cheaper than the Vita was going to be at launch. And also, due to being the Vita to the market by nearly 6 months, it had a larger library.
This showed with sales. The Vita had strong launch sales, but it just seemed to stop moving after 2012. Sony even went so far as to stop publishing sales figures for it after its first year. By its second year of life, many third-party publishers had stopped supporting the system, and it seemed to be falling more and more into the category of niche hardware. But with that said, because of this, it did end up becoming an RPG and visual novel powerhouse. But we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah, so let's get into 3 different revisions of the Vita. I'm sure there may have been smaller revisions or whatnot, but there are really only 3 major versions of this. And this right here is the most sought after version. Funnily enough, this is the launch version. Now, this is a Wi-Fi only version, though I'm not sure if you can even get the 3G to work anymore.
Probably not.
I mean, maybe. You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
This launch model was known as the PCH 1000, but most people just call it the OLED Vita because it has the very beautiful OLED screen. And when I say beautiful, I mean it. This is probably one of the nicest screens I've seen on any handheld ever. I'd go as far to say even better than on the Switch. Like,
yeah,
this
feels better than the Switch.
And it's so it feels almost too nice for a handheld. It has kind of this shiny, glossy finish on it, which means it gets finger marks super easily.
But
still. Cleanable with a microfiber cloth. It's honestly one of the best screens seen of any handheld ever, and it actually gets a pretty decent battery life, averaging about 5 to 7 hours on a charge.
Yeah, depending on what you're playing and where your settings are.
I've had it go up to almost like, say, 10 hours playing stuff like Axiom Verge. So the biggest issue comes with storage. There is no onboard storage on the original Vita, meaning the expensive, especially hard to find because they've been discontinued now, memory cards are a must. But again, I cannot stress how great this is just to play games on. Even though it's essentially laid out like a modern PlayStation controller, the buttons are a little smaller, and that's actually pretty good. They feel a little clickier than your average PlayStation buttons, and I really like that, especially for playing stuff like, say, Mega Man X4 via the PlayStation Network. But then a few years went by, the Vita wasn't selling great, and the PlayStation 4 was about to come out, so Sony figured that they were gonna try their hand again at the Vita, kind of. And that's where we got to PCH 2000, the second revision Vita, or really, as most people call it, the Vita Model 2.
Yeah. The screen wasn't as nice because it was LCD instead of OLED.
You can tell.
It had a better battery life. It was thinner, it was lighter, and it came at the same time as a software update allowing for remote play with the PS4, allowing for PS4 games to be streamed to the Vita, which is amazing.
Especially nice is seeing as often with handhelds you find out their chargers. The second model Vita, instead of using a proprietary charger, just uses micro USB, meaning that if you find out a charger, you can go into any dollar store or whatnot and just get a new one.
Which seems to be kind of like PlayStation's big thing is like the
micro USB now.
Micro USB, which is amazing. I love it.
Absolutely. It's just standard at this point.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, it's like that you change the charger, alright, but you couldn't give us like a micro SD card option?
Yeah.
Though the second revision Vita isn't quite as nice as the original OLED model, they are typically cheaper. Like,
yeah.
I've seen them for up to, I wouldn't say half as much, but like only 2/3 the cost of a regular Vita. You're not kind of swayed by some of the weird quirks we're talking about.
Yeah.
That might be the model to go for. That said, if you want a console on a budget, maybe wait for the Switch Lite.
Yes.
So,
PSTV.
Yeah, PSTV, the PlayStation TV. I should keep this short since I did a dedicated buying guide on that. So, there are a few things I'd like to mention with that, just for those who haven't seen that, and also a few updates to that guide.
Yes.
So the PSTV was first released in 2013, and it's literally just a home console Vita. It was called the PlayStation Vita TV in Japan, but just the PlayStation TV, or PSTV for short, in North America and Europe. I forgot to mention my dedicated PSTV video, by the way, that came in a beautiful white shell originally in Japan. It looks really nice.
Yeah.
Though I think the black kind of goes better with most other PlayStation consoles.
Yeah, honestly, PlayStation's thing is like the sleek black things, and I love it.
But the weird thing is because there's PlayStation TV in North America, but then there's PlayStation View, which is PlayStation's TV service, and then don't they also have another service called PlayStation TV? And then that's not to be confused with the Sony Bravia TV, which was a TV with a built-in PS2.
Yes.
I think what really was the death knell from the beginning for the PS TV was the name.
That there was already PlayStation stuff kind of sharing the name.
Yeah, like they literally could have called it like PS Vita Home Edition or something like that.
Yeah.
But you know, it wasn't a bad piece of tech. It was limited to only 720p out, but you know, you could still stream games from a PS4.
Yes.
It was still very small, probably the smallest home console I've owned, but
It wasn't portable, but it could be used with a PS3 or PS4 controller, which is awesome.
yeah, and of course there's some issues with that. You know, if you'd want to use touchscreen stuff, you'd have to click into joysticks and then move them around.
And hope it worked.
Yeah, but with that, it wasn't and still isn't compatible with all PS Vita games. Sony had a whitelist and it hasn't been updated in a while. That said, if you want to get around that, through modding, all things are possible, so jot that down. The PS TV was marketed as a streaming box, which is weird because it wasn't that. It was literally a home console Vita. And while the Vita did have apps like Crunchyroll in its own browser, which are still up, it also had apps like Netflix, which has been removed, or MLB.TV, which is still downloadable from the PlayStation Store, but is completely broken and impossible to use. I got my PS TV bundle that came with the console, a controller, and a download of the Lego Movie game, new at Walmart in Texas for $25 American. And I saw some people getting the individual units for as low as $10 at some Walmarts.
Ironically though, due to word getting out about how cheap and plentiful they were, people started buying them up. And now if you want one, you're looking at around $100 USD or so.
So, to recap, what are our thoughts on Vita hardware? OLED is the best quality system, Model 2 is the cheapest, and PSTV is the best for recording games, even though it has that weird HDCP encryption that's a pain to get around, like on a PS3. But if you can get around it, that's the one you should probably want, especially if you mod it. I love using the Vita. I think you do too.
It's great.
I really love its Bubble OS, as I call it. It's really easy to use, especially these tabs are optimized for use with its touchscreen. But with that said, it's so simple and elegant that it still works great on the PS TV with a controller.
Yes.
Now, as we mentioned, it has a very niche library.
It's not for everyone, but if you like RPGs or visual novels...
And there are some other things, you know, there's Sonic All-Stars Racing, Uncharted Golden Abyss, Assassin's Creed.
Farming Simulator 14.
Exactly, that's great, and it's like a $10 game. I love Farming Simulator more than I should, don't I?
Yeah. Despite how niche it is, indies and limited run games have become a major thing on this because we're still getting new releases, despite Sony formally discontinuing it worldwide back in March of 2019.
And now, to keep in mind, I don't think they're making physical games, so we're still getting new ones digitally at least, which is great. But we did see the rise on here of something I've seen be a major issue on the Switch that I did a video on years ago that I called the bait and switch.
Yes.
Where we'd get games like the Final Fantasy X-10-2 collection, where one game would be on the cartridge, but then you'd only have a download code for the other.
Yes.
And this was the first console I saw this becoming an issue on. And while it's not nearly as prevalent as it is on the Switch, mainly because the Switch already has more titles. It was enough of a problem that it annoys me, and as you can only really buy games digitally or used nowadays, could be a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
But with that said, backwards compatibility is pretty decent.
Yeah.
You can play PSP games and PS1 classics via the PlayStation Network, though there are some emulation issues on these, especially on the PS TV. And I don't know why, though maybe it was something with the OS on there or something. I don't know.
And it could have just been like that the emulation wasn't that great.
Yeah, it was weird because they worked great on the Vita itself, but they were very problematic on the PS TV.
Yes.
But not nearly as bad as it used to be. I feel like they've been improved on in recent firmware updates. The worst one was Mega Man X4, which for a while kept pausing every few seconds on the PS TV.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Speaking of the PlayStation Network though, you can still play games online, use all the online services. Though PS Plus games stopped being offered for the Vita earlier this year, along with PS Plus PS3 games. So with that, we have a stack of games here. Shall I start? So first off, we have a visual novel, Psychedelica of a Black Butterfly. You essentially wake up with amnesia, and there's a bunch of other people with amnesia, and you're locked in this strange mansion filled with monsters.
You have to figure out who you are and get out.
Yeah.
It's actually, when we got the Vita, we also got this one.
We also got Hot Shot Ghosts, which we didn't have the case for, is in here, that I still haven't played. Here's the thing, though visual novels are light on gameplay, what matters most is story, and Psychedelica of the Black Butterfly just has a really good story. So next up, we have Ninja Gaiden Sigma Plus. Of course, there are the original NES Ninja Gaiden games. Then there's Ninja Gaiden, the reboot on an original Xbox. Then there was Ninja Gaiden Black, which was an updated version of that. Then there was Ninja Gaiden Sigma on PS3. And finally, on Vita, we got this. And it's a great 3D action adventure game. You can run on walls and leave pools of blood by just killing people in feudal Japan. It's great.
You're a very polite ninja though, because you never like bust through the paper doors, you open them.
Yeah, like I was like, these are paper doors, right? Why can't I slash through them? It's fun though. Okay, here's a really weird game that this is a game that's gotten you into Katamari. And I'd like to give a shout out to my buddy G from G the Next Level for hooking us up with Touch My Katamari for Vita. One of the mini games that doesn't work with the PS TV, and even if you mod to work, it's kind of weird because they shoehorned in touch controls, but it's a good Katamari game.
I hate how, hate it because the thing is, it's not like your base Katamari. They make, the whole thing is, you're supposed to be making Katamaris, but, it's the balls of the junk. But in this one, it's not just junk. You have to, collect certain things and make them a certain size while collecting only those things. And if you don't do it, people call you really mean names, and I wasn't okay with that.
I liked their take on Americans.
Yeah.
It was very funny.
Yeah, it was really.
Gee willikers, man.
Yeah, we were sitting there, and it's I'm like, this game literally looks and sounds like somebody tried to make Americans without consulting an American.
So Earthbound.
Yeah.
So next up is Persona 4 Golden, and this is a fantastic RPG. It's a great Persona game. Not as good as P5, but good. I need to beat it. This is the one Vita game that everyone has talked about. Instead, I'd like to talk about a different RPG, which was the reason I bought a Vita, and that was Ys, Memories of Cell
Sonic, All-Star Racing.
No, but that's a great version of the game. No, Ys Memories of Celceta. It's my favorite game in the Ys series. You play as Adol Christian, who's wound up in the land of Celceta. He wanders out of the woods, having lost his memory. And not only do you have to venture across the land, making friends and save the world, but also collect fragments of your memories. It's really great. You have a diverse party in there. If you played Ys 8 on the PS4, also the Vita, or the Switch, it plays exactly like that actually. It's a bit better optimized than the Vita version of Ys 8. Memories of Celceta is a remake of Ys 4, which weirdly enough had 3 different versions of it to begin with, and it's by far the best version. It's a fantastic JRPG, action JRPG, and really, if you want a great action RPG, it's a must play. You can also get all the PSP Ys games on here, Ys 7,
and
Chronicles,
I'm gonna stop you now,
Falgana.
We'll talk about Ys.
It's good. It's great. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, also good. Not as good as the PS3 360 version, but also good. The game selection on the Vita, it's niche. You'll notice a lot of indies, JRPGs, and
visual novels.
But the thing is that you got a lot of games on the Vita that really wouldn't have come out anywhere else. Because keep in mind, this was a few years before some like super rare games or limited run really started taking off.
And honestly, it's so good to like start seeing some of the stuff that was really niche for the Vita coming to the Switch, because that's just opening it up.
But for now, it's a great niche console. But here's the real question. So, as we said, the Vita is great, but it's kind of a powerhouse. But how's it compared to its predecessor? So should you buy a PS Vita or a PSP? Well, I could certainly say which one's cheaper.
Yeah.
The PSP is so much cheaper. It's like, what, $50 if you find one? I mean, maybe a little more if you get like the Hannah Montana one that we have.
But you've also got to consider, when going in, the fact that PSP does use UMD discs, and those discs are not always taken care of.
No, those discs break so easily, especially the case around. I mean, you can't buy third-party cases from Amazon now, but so often you find games, they break, or even worse, you find like cracked discs.
The ones that are so scratched to hell.
And because of how small they are, they're like impossible to get resurfaced. If you're a modder and you want to get a good modding console, I'd say go with the PSP over the Vita.
Yes.
Memory cards are a big reason. Why get an expensive ass Vita memory card? We can get a PSP and put 64 gigs worth of micro SD cards in there,
yes,
and just load it up with emulators, homebrew games. You get like Cave Story and stuff on there. I don't know, the Vita is a really fun console to play with and whatnot, but if you're on a budget or a modder, or you really just want a portable PlayStation console,
yeah,
I'd say this, unless you want to keep it stock. Because not only are UMD discs breakable, but I swear these drives go out pretty frequently nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, the older PSPs are nearly 15 years old at this point. And speaking of which, if you haven't gotten your PSP looked at, and you've had one since launch, get it looked at. The good thing about the Vita is there's just fewer, even though there's more joysticks and whatnot,
yeah,
there's fewer moving parts.
Honestly, I love like the dual joystick as well.
Yeah, and they feel so much better than that dumb nub on the PSP.
Yeah.
But, and here's the thing as well, before the Vita came out, even though the PSP had a much larger library, you know,
yes,
you got like Chinatown Wars and stuff on it, you still got a lot of those niche games on it as well. So I really can't say which has the better library in my opinion.
It's more just what you want for a PlayStation handheld.
Like, personally, I'd say the PSP has a more diverse library,
yes,
and thus by that criteria is better.
It's like, honestly, game-wise, it's a little bit more kid-friendly as well. You're gonna, like, if you're trying to get your kid into something and you're a PlayStation fan and you don't want to go with Nintendo, PSPs are amazing for that. If you're trying to get into it yourself, PS Vita is kind of a good place to start.
And of course, I think the big thing is it comes down to price. The PSP is cheaper, but it's also older. Here's what I'd say. If you want a handheld console right now, and you're looking at game libraries, if you see games that are Vita games that you really, really like, first check to see if they're on the Switch.
Yes.
Yes. So should we end off?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was our video on the PS Vita. We love this thing. It's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. And if you can take anything from this video, it's that the Vita is not for everyone. And it can get a little pricey as far as modern consoles go. But it's a lot of fun to collect for. There's some really unique titles on it. It has a great community around it as well. Shout out to Marcus over at Vita Player, but you know.
And honestly, I just really love the Vita community energy. You guys give me life.
I think the thing is as well is like, there are two types of Vita collectors. You have people who get the Vita and play it casually, but then you have the Vita community, which is so diehard and into.
Yes.
But like, unlike a lot of other gaming communities, I feel like there's a lot of positivity there. Like,
we all know the Vita didn't get enough love, and so we just try to give as much love as possible, like, to just everybody.
Yeah. So speaking of love, let's give some love to our socials. Yeah. So at Stuff We Play on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Do you want to plug yours before you drink more of that sweet, sweet peach Coca-Cola? No, you don't want to plug at L_C's_all on Twitter and Instagram.
Also at Paisley_, what is it? Yeah.
Paisley Daisy?
Yeah, at Paisley Daisy.
And with that, thank you very much for watching. Support us on Patreon and join great people such as the Golden Bolt and Justin Chipman on there. They're great folks who appreciate the support. Stay classy, and we'll see you before I get more tongue-tied.
Oh, I was so excited for the point.
You ready? And we'll see you next time.